Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. And I got to tell you, when I have old friends on, and I don't mean old because of our ages, I mean old because of the length of time that we've known each other. When you have dear friends on that you've known for a long time, there's a certain warmth and comfort about it. And I'm not going to apologize for where this podcast is going to go. Just hang on and just, let us reminisce together. We're just bringing you into the conversation. She is a sales trainer with Dale Carnegie, and you are going to love this lady. Her name is Laura Jones. Laura and I used to work there. Laura used to be my boss. Can you believe that? She used to be my boss. How do you imagine managing this? It's probably what made her go into another area of the company. She was just like, oh, dear God, no, but you can find her on LinkedIn at Laura Jones, but you can find her right here, right now on the Intentional Encourager podcast. And I call her LAJ. So if that's what I do, just ignore us. LAJ, how are you today?
I am fantastic. Glad to be talking to my friend.
Well,
my longtime friend.
Listen.
We've already had that conversation.
I am very much aware of I will be 50 next August.
Shoo. I'm not far behind.
I will not be Hawaii 5-0. It'll be more like Hillbilly 5-0. Yeah, next August of 2022, I will be 50 years old, and I cannot believe that. I mean, it seems like yesterday, and I remember walking in to a place called Auburn University in Louisville, Kentucky, and I walked in on a Monday morning. My family had come down with me, and we were there the night before, and I met you for the first time in July of 2009, and it seems so long ago, but it really doesn't seem that long ago.
It doesn't.
And that's how we met. I got to ask you something. Take me through the last year for you around this pandemic, because you are like me. You're really social. You like to be around people. You love helping people and training and doing all the things you do. So take me through the last year of how it's been as we record this around COVID-19 and still in the midst of the pandemic. Take me through what the last year's been like for you.
Yeah. Like everybody, it's been interesting. And like everybody, I think my gut is that it's been a tough year. It's been really hard, really, really hard. I think psychologically, my mind and my attitude, my overall well-being, my mental health. But in hindsight, I keep a jar on my kitchen counter, and anytime something good happens, I achieve a goal, or just, it's just something really positive happens, I make a note of it and I put it in the jar, and I reviewed it on New Year's Eve. And I look back, I was like, you know what? 2020 was really overall, it was a good year. Now, day to day was tough. So, of course, as you know, I'm single and live alone. And so that just the thought of being shut down and isolated, and I'm an extroverted introvert. So I like to be out and out, but I need that time to recharge. So, I don't mind being home and on my own and doing things. I need that time to recharge. But the thought of being completely isolated, it was very depressing. So I was lucky at the time to be working for a nonprofit. It was a residential facility. And so because it was a residential facility and it was a small organization, for the consistency of our residents and to keep their life as normal as possible, we still going into the office. We split our shifts. So I was working from home 2.5 days a week and working in the office 2.5 days a week. And our residents were, and the staff, they were such a huge blessing to me in the past year. They really became like my family. I spent Mother's Day with them. I spent Thanksgiving with them. Didn't even spend it with my own family. I could. So I think maybe even spent Easter with them. Anyway, they were my family away from COVID. So that was a huge blessing. And I tried to maintain my regular routine as much as possible. Even with the gym shut down, tennis in Louisville, they actually took the tennis nets down at the parks. You couldn't even play. There were no nets. They took the basketball hoops, like literally the metal rims, down from the basketball court. So
you know what happened there was all the people that came over from West Virginia that snuck out of the state. They came over and took the nets and the rims. And
I thought I saw you.
See, that's what I'm saying. I mean, they were like, yeah, this is good tin. Here, you can melt this down and get a couple bucks out of it. So
that's right.
You were talking about the jar in your kitchen counter.
Yeah.
That were at our house, it would be full of jelly beans, and I'd just walk by and go, there's something good that happened today. Here's a couple jelly beans, That's what I would.
You did the opposite. You're supposed to put things in the jar, not take them out.
Well, it's potato. I mean, what do you expect? I mean, but you know how my tiny mind works. I mean, but no, I love that concept of really what you were creating, Laura, was ways to stay encouraged and ways to create gratitude. When you went back on December 31st and looked at those little moments that you wrote down, was there one that was like an aha moment? Like, I didn't realize that this happened, or I'd forgotten that this happened.
I think as a whole, and there were several things that were goals that may have gotten derailed, but they were steps towards those goals that I had achieved. So that was a positive, and I'd forgotten some little things along the way. I'm new back to tennis the past couple of years, and early in the year, I won my first match. So that was an accomplishment I put down. So a small step towards a bigger goal with that hobby. I got back into horseback riding, which I had done majority of my life and had been away from for probably the past 15 years or so, and had that hobby back up. So those the bright spots, but the big one is my career goal and getting back involved with Dale Carnegie and working full time now for Dale Carnegie. That was one that I had worked towards for many, many years to become full-time with Dale Carnegie. I had a couple of opportunities in the past that didn't pan out. And looking back in hindsight, that was fine. That was the right thing at the moment. And totally unexpectedly, and I won't go into the whole story, but it was actually a dream that kind of fallen by the wayside. And then this past year, something happened where I'd pretty much completely written it off, was resigned that it wouldn't happen, and actually grieved it a little bit this past year. And out of the blue, got a phone call and got recruited to come work full time. And I'm thrilled. I'm loving it and doing what I had, following my passion.
So you won your first tennis match. I won my first argument with my wife after about 8 or 9 years.
So it took quarantining and confining.
It took a pandemic. Yeah. I mean, you celebrate small victories wherever you can get them, I mean, you kick somebody's butt in tennis, and my wife's like, you know what? I'll just let you win this argument for once. And in 24 plus years of marriage, I'm like, yeah, it's little victories, little. It'll
take you a while to catch up to her winning record.
Right? That's true. She's like the GOAT as far as she's like MJ. I'd be like playing one-on-one with Michael Jordan, but I love what you said there about career goals, because I think we had a lot of people during the pandemic that felt like maybe their career went off track, or they got sidetracked, or, they were heading in a certain direction, and then all of a sudden it kind of paused, and now they're trying to restart that or moving toward it. And listen, I don't want to make light of anything like that. And you know me well enough to know that I'm not, is when there's so many people that lost their jobs and were downsized and things like that. But that had to give you such incredible strength and encouragement, knowing that even in the midst of a lifetime event, I mean, I've never seen this type of thing in my almost 49 years, you know, in a once in a lifetime event, you were still able to push through. What was the one thing that kept you motivated to keep pursuing that goal once you had it in sight, once it came back into view for you? What was the one thing that kept you motivated in continuing to push for that goal?
Well, backing up to, as you said, just what a tough time it was for so many people with their careers and their jobs. And back in March, speaking of my mental health, just had gone in such a downward spiral because here I am working for a very small nonprofit and our events being canceled. I was very new working in the nonprofit field and seeing what the shutdowns and things like that were doing to our economy and doing with people's jobs. And I was fearful that I was going to be on the unemployment line. So that was part of that mindset, and not just with my own job, just with our economy in general, and what a hard hit we were all going to feel. So that downward spiral, one thing that I've been doing for several years as a result of one of our good friends, every day I write down my personal goals every morning. And whether it's my goal, it's not a to-do list, but my goals for the day, my goals for the next year, my goals for life. And I put a date on there that I want to accomplish it. Well, back in March, with the world just so much uncertainty and everything shutting down, and I said they took the tennis nets down. I don't know when I can play tennis again, much less increase my rating. So it was so overwhelming to me. It was depressing for me to even open that book and begin to write down my goals. And I stopped and started a couple of times through the course of 2020. And it was hard because you didn't know what the future held or when those things would be realistically possible again. And so I think, and as I mentioned, I grieved that opportunity, just knowing that my dream career probably wasn't going to pan out. And so when it came up unexpectedly, it was tough. I enjoyed the place where I was working. It had become such a special place. It had become my little family this past year. And it was a really tough decision to make, but to show our constituents that I was working with at the time to never give up on your dreams, that was what really pushed me to pursue this, was to set an example for them.
See, I would keep a journal, Laura, but my problem would be I'd forget where I put it.
Yeah.
And so I
the same spot every day.
Right. Or I would be like, I wrote that. Oh, I can't believe I wrote that, in my dimension.
Now, I'll say I'm the same with the journal. I'm like, I wrote that. I don't do a journal, but writing the goals, what I want to achieve. So it's kind of a future.
Well, my wife tells me, she's like, you talk enough, and then you're going to write your thoughts down on paper. Like,
but you're writing your second book.
Yeah, but she isn't going to see it till it's done. So, I mean, whatever. Hey, let's step aside, take a quick break. We come back. We're going to talk more about the idea of just powering through things. I love what Laura said there. We'll probably get into more of our connected journey. And then later on, she's going to tell her story, and you're going to want to stick around for that. But my guest, my dear friend Laura Jones, joins me today on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton here. I want to tell you about our sponsor, SEO National. SEO stands for Search Engine Optimization. Now, what's that, you might say? Well, search engine optimization helps you show up higher on search engines in front of paying customers for words that you as a business owner can monetize. What a great concept. SEO National is owned by my good buddy Damon Burton, who's been a guest here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Not only has Damon and his team worked with businesses of all sizes, from e-commerce startups to NBA teams and Shark Tank featured businesses, but more importantly, Damon and his team are about transparency, trust, and providing lifetime value. So much so that he still has his first customers after opening SEO National 14 years ago. Let me give you some intentional encouragement and call Damon and his team today at 855-736-6285 or go to www.seonational.com and get a free quote.
Laura, you were talking just a minute ago, and I think a lot of people, we have the idea of when we're at a company, and there are some places that I've been that I didn't feel as connected as places that I'd been previously. And the one place, and I've always said the best group of people I've ever worked with was our group there at Sullivan. And it's funny, out of the circle of people that I kept in touch with, everybody but one person has been on this podcast.
Really?
Everybody but one.
And
he knows who he is. Matt Gast.
I think
you know who you are.
On LinkedIn today, didn't he?
You know who you are. Matt Gast. You know who you are. I'm not going to say his name, but when I text him and say, listen, I recorded a podcast today with Laura.
Come on, Matt. Any up?
Yes. Yeah. Your clairvoyancy is just tremendous. I mean,
I was thinking about Matty yesterday.
Matty Matt is what we called him, and is what we still call him. But that's what I'm saying. It was such a special place. And you were involved in leadership there at the time. Looking back, being in leadership, I was on the front lines. You were in leadership, and I'm not trying to say, but you had a little different perspective. You kind of saw the big picture. We were focused on the day-to-day of setting appointments and making phone calls and going out and seeing the students in their home, and that's what we did. You had a bigger picture, a bigger level there. Did you realize at the time what we were doing, and what did you see at that time from a leadership standpoint that maybe I didn't see being on the front lines?
It was a special time. We worked hard and we played hard. We truly did. And it was so neat with our remote employees like you and Matt and many others, that they were closer and tighter. We were a tighter knit bunch than the people who worked there locally together and seeing everybody every day. So it really was a special time. And I think, as far as not seeing what you all saw, and we had these conversations, that not to try to keep because it was tough. You all had a tough job as far as not having that day-to-day of people to bounce your frustrations off with, or your coworkers to have that camaraderie. So we always felt like that was our job, to keep you connected and to connect you with each other and to provide that network when you were out on the road, our road warriors. And so but also to keep that motivation and that positivity up for you, and not to snowball you or to keep things that were important from you, but to shield you from maybe some of the negativity or take some of the heat, so that you could keep doing what you needed to do and keep your focus. I would say that was, and not in a bad way. It was just things, let's diffuse it before the message gets to you, or let's say it in such a way where we can maintain maintain the momentum you have.
I love that. And I think a lot of times, Laura, is that leaders don't understand, there's two schools of thought. And you're the perfect person to ask this question, because there's two schools of thought. Some leaders would say, and I would probably lean to this, Like, listen, the best thing to do is just deliver the news and let's talk about it. I'm not going to keep it from you, but I'm going to deliver it to you. And even in the midst of blowback or whatever, at least we're all on the same page. I didn't keep, and I think when I managed people, I always thought there was a certain nobility. Like when I know something, you'll know something. And there's a certain nobility to that. Like, okay, I'm delivering it. I've not internalized it and tried to spin it or put it in a different direction. And I'm not saying that you guys did that, but I know that there are leaders that want to say, well, let me draft a statement and let me read a statement, or let me just kind of word this in a different way so that everybody that we're trying to sugarcoat it or something like that. And I'm not sure where I fall there, because even in the nobility of delivering the message, even in the moment of delivering it, you're still going to get blowback whether you try to sugarcoat it or not, because some messages are they're just jarring at times, or they can be very jarring. What was the one thing you learned about delivering messages that you still kind of take to the, because when you're delivering training, and I don't mean to be long-winded here, but when you're delivering training, there are a lot of times when you're delivering a message that's challenging to someone's thought process. And as a leader, when you deliver a message like that you have to deliver, it's challenging a thought process. So what was a technique or something that you learned then when you were leading people that you still use to this day when you're delivering messages?
Yes. I think because of the relationship we all had with each other, and we did have that very friendly, the employee leader relationship, that we had a lot of transparency, but and being realistic, but trying to filter out the negativity or the politics or the emotions that may be coming from other areas. So kind of being that go-between. But as you're saying, that if you're not direct at times, then the message will get lost. There's the old sandwich approach. Say something positive, then deliver the bad news, and then say something positive. Well, you do that too often, that negative is going to get missed. People are going to want to hear the positive. And sometimes there's a need to be direct and to make it clear. And there's the quote, to be unclear is to be unkind. And if you try to soften the blow too much, especially when you're in that conversation and talking about lots of things, and it's very easy for that message to get lost if you're not direct about it.
I love that. To be unclear is to be unkind. And it's so right. And I'll tell you this, the thing that I always loved about our relationship was, from the minute that we got to know each other, it was always consistent. Like every time I saw you, I would say, hey, LAJ, or I would text you, and that would be, LAJ, need to talk to you, or something like that. Even when you weren't my boss, I think the thing that you and I, and the thing that I would say for anybody listening, if you've got a team of people that you're leading, be consistent with them. Like, it's perfectly okay to address them the same way every time, because it just continues to build that consistency. And then when you really need to bounce a hard, and listen, there were times that you had to deliver a hard message to me, like, hey, but we worked through it. But there were a lot more times that you and I would see each other at a break, or we'd be at dinner, or we'd be eating lunch, or I'd come sit with you, or you come sit with me, and we just talked.
Yeah.
And that's why the relationship is still good, even to this day. And I'll get a text from you every now and then going, I really love that podcast that you did. And I know that I know it's coming from where it's coming from you, because it just has built on 12 plus years of conversations that we've had, that we were just talking,
Yeah.
I would ask you about your sister, or ask you about your family, and you'd ask about my family. And it's just a really cool relationship. And I think people are missing that. I'm going to ask you this before we step aside and take another break. When you see people that you're delivering training to now, what's the one thing that they're missing that you know when you walk into that room, it's like, okay, I can see this. I think you're missing this, but this is what I can do to help you.
Wow.
I learned to ask good questions at Sullivan because I'd have to sit. I would have to sit and interview kids in their house, and I'd ask a question, and they'd go, See, I thought I was going to get you on one. I was like, I am going to ask her a question. It's going to stump the band.
Who taught you that, Brian Sexton?
I'll never tell, but I have a question. And
the best questions are the ones that make you think. You don't have to talk. Let there be silence so they can think about the answer.
Well, listen, I have lobbed one across the net. It's up to you whether you're going to hit it or let it go.
I will say there is no blanket answer because every group and every training that we do is different, but we're there to meet the needs of that group. There's, I think, the blanket generalities you may hear from the person who is requesting the training for their people, the generational differences, the Gen Z and the millennials and the different, they get a bad rap, and it's just the differences between the generations. So I think there's what we're told the need is, but every group is different. I think maybe the connectivity and people connecting with others, not because we're so much in that electronic and digital age, and actually having those interactions. So the interactions and also the being open-minded, you get skepticism, and it takes building that person's trust for them to not be skeptical. Okay, what's this all about? But it's human nature going into whether it be a training or the unknown, to be a little skeptical. What's this going to be like? I want to know. So overcoming that skepticism. Part of training, the first, depending on how long the training, but the first portion of training is to win the audience over to your side and to entertain them, engage them, get them to like you, and then your training will be much more effective.
Yeah, I always thought, just razzle dazzle them with your fancy footwork, and then that would just kind of get them involved, or just do something totally stupid and just be like, yeah, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And I say that because I've done it, and you use the absurd to really go, oh my goodness. And then when they're going, oh, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, then you hit them with something really profound and powerful, and it really kind of opens up the mind. Like, yeah, that's okay. Maybe this is not as dumb as I thought it was, and there's real correlation between what was just shown and what was said. And so, yeah, that's cool. Let's step aside, take another break. When we come back, those of you watching on YouTube, you're going to see a couple things behind Laura that is going to give you a pivotal idea into her story. There are two words that if I would say these to Laura Jones would make her just giddy with excitement. I'm going to tell you what the two words War Eagle mean to Laura. We'll do that when we come back here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Hey, everybody, Brian Sexton. Want to tell you about my new book, People Buy From People, 10 Powerful People Lessons from the Ultimate People Person, my dad. My dad was one of the greatest connectors that I ever knew, and he shared with me 10 connecting principles that I have used throughout my 25-year sales and sales management, customer engagement, and leadership career that I'm passing along to you. If you want to be a stronger, deeper, and more powerful connector, you've got to pick up a copy of People Buy From People. There are concepts in there that you may not realize help make you a power connector. You can go to Amazon and pick it up, Kindle if you're an e-reader and you like to do it that way, or now available on Audible. And there's one other way you can get a copy of People Buy from People. You can get one from me and I'll sign it for you. You go to intentionalmediaandpublishing@gmail.com and send me an email, and I'll share with you the link on how you can get a signed copy. You can buy a signed copy directly from me. Again, People Buy from People. If you want to connect like never before, pick up your copy today of People Buy from People. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Okay, Laura. Notice I did not say roll tide. Those are fighting words. That's cussing.
Where's my leave button?
Yeah, where's it? Yeah, I'm sorry. We got disconnected. My internet was bad. I had to jump off.
Around the hole and down the hole.
Well, here's the thing. There's that love-hate between Marshall and West Virginia because, West Virginia is like big brother and we're little brother. And again, I get it. But Auburn and Alabama, that's like a whole different level. And trust me, I have a huge amount of respect for that rivalry because it's a real rivalry, unlike Marshall and West Virginia, where it's like, West Virginia is just like Marshall, and Marshall is like, we hate the Mountaineers, and
they hate us, and the Mountaineers like, be a little pesky.
really. So tell me about how you became an Auburn fan. You ended up going to school at Auburn too, so that was pretty cool. Was that always something that you wanted to do, was go to Auburn, or did you just kind of fall into? Tell me how that all. Take me through your story about how you ended up at Auburn.
Oh, ended up at Auburn. I am a third-generation Auburn grad. In fact, I have my grandfather's yearbook from 1927 on my shelf over here, and my dad's from actually, I have all of his. So 51, 52, 53, and 54. So
if you had said, I'm going to Tuscaloosa, it would not have gone well in your family.
My dad told my brother, my sister, and I that that we could get as good of an education anywhere within 2 hours of where we lived as we could anywhere in the country. So we go within 2 hours of where we live, which is Louisville, Kentucky at the time for me. And unless there was a specialty program or a special reason that there was a school we were looking at, or we wanted to go to Auburn. So those were our three choices, either within 2 hours of Louisville, Auburn, which was about 8 hours away, or a specialty school. And my senior year, actually, I was not a good student in high school. And there were some things in my educational background that turned that around, but not. I mean, my dad locked me in my brother's room for 3 hours a night to try to get me to be a better student. And even that didn't work. So my grades were horrible, but my dad told me, aren't you going to apply anywhere else but Auburn? And I said, no, if you don't let me go to Auburn, I'm not going to college. And luckily I did turn my grades around, and he caved, and I got to go to Auburn, which was kind of a side story on that. There was a program at U of L that I wanted to go into, but I wanted to go to Auburn for my undergrad. And so I told my dad, I can go to Auburn and then go back to U of L and get the second degree. It's like, nope, if you want that degree, you're just going to go to U of L. It's like, well, then I'm not going to U of L. And wound up a couple of years after I graduated from Auburn going and getting the certificate from U of L. But that was my only choice. In fact, I took the ACT at Auburn the weekend of my brother's graduation.
So why were you so locked into Auburn? And I say that, and you're like, well, Brian, that's a duh question. But was it the carrying on the legacy for you, or was it more of all the things that you had seen from a distance about? Because people, you were asking me before we started recording, you're like, well, where's Bryce at? And Bryce was a little kid when we worked together. And she's like, well, where's Bryce at? And I'm like, he's going to Marshall. And you're like, well, duh, that's, it's like the ultimate no-brainer. Yeah. Was it kind of that way for you with Auburn? Was like, I'm going there to carry on the legacy? Or was there something else about Auburn that was just so romantic to you about it that you just had to go there?
you know what? I think it was a combination of things. This is back in the day, the internet, I had the college book that was that thick and would get mail from all kinds of colleges and things. And I kept all the brochures and, and dreamed of my college days, but it was always Auburn. And I think because my dad grew up in Auburn and my grandparents were there, we have family there. It was just, still to this day, I'm going in about 6 weeks. I went this fall. It is just near and dear to my heart. It's really, I guess, a second home. And I, to be honest, didn't know that much about the actual school. My brother went there, had been to football games, had been around the campus, but just, and it was definitely the right choice for me. It was, in the end, I think it was maybe the luck that I was so determined to go to the right school, but it was the right choice in the end.
There are a lot of pretty famous athletes that went to Auburn.
Yeah.
A lot of famous athletes. Did you ever go to school with anybody that was recognizable? Because I can't really say that about going to Marshall. The people will say, well, did you ever have a class with Chad Pennington or Randy Moss? I'm like, no, I didn't. I never had any classes. I had a couple classes with a couple football players. There was a guy named Troy Brown that was on campus there. He ended up playing for the New England Patriots. Mike Bartram was there. I was a sophomore. Those guys were seniors. I wasn't in any classes with them. Did you ever have any classes with anybody that we might recognize or know? Here's your opportunity to name drop, Laura.
My opportunity if I knew the guy's last name. That's awful. My senior year, we had a really cool class. It was a leadership class about Auburn, and we had class at all these different iconic landmarks around campus. We had a project of what we recommended to the school to do to make the student experience, to make the university a better place. Actually, my team's project in that course, it was implemented and is in practice today. It's the Tiger Transit, the bus system that takes students from the parking lots to the different facilities around campus. It's the transit system. So, but this course, we had class on the 50-yard line at Jordan Hare on a beautiful, sunny, crystal clear blue sky day in April. And we had one of the guys on the football team, and that was 19, yeah. But we had been, this previous season was 11-0. So we were undefeated. We were on probation on, no postseason bowl games, but we were undefeated that year. And he was the running back, and his name was Frank. I can't remember his last name. That's awful. But he came out of the field. We were on the 50-yard line. He got there a few minutes late, and he's carrying a metal folding chair. And our teacher, who was like the dean of students, was like, no, can't have a chair. We were like, this is his house. He can use a chair. He can use a chair. So that was very cool, having class on the 50-yard line with our running back from our undefeated season.
I see a book behind you about Pat Dye, and of course, yeah. Coach Dye, legendary coach, just passed away last year. When you think about people like that were there then, that had an impact, and of course, if there's an ESPN documentary about Auburn, where at the same time there was Bo Jackson, Frank Thomas, the Hall of Fame baseball player, and Charles Barkley, the Hall of Fame basketball player. They were all there at Auburn. And then a guy that was there as they were coming and he was leaving was legendary swimmer Rowdy Gaines. Mm-hmm. Because Auburn has a legendary swim program. They're tremendous swim program. Tennis. I mean, they have, it's a very well-rounded school. And of course, they just made a change with football coaches. Gus Malzahn, they replaced him with a guy named Brian Harsin from why can't I think of that? Boise State. Thank you. I was like, they played Marshall 2 years ago. Boise State. Yeah. See, folks, try to do a live podcast and come up with this stuff in thin air. You do it and see if you're any better.
It's not just me.
Yeah. But no, I mean, Auburn really is a special place. I got to ask you one thing before I get to the question I really want to ask you. A few years back, there was an incident at Toomer's Corner with the poisoning of the trees at Toomer's Corner. What did that do to Auburn fans across the country? Because for those of you that are not familiar, Toomer's Corner is a place in Auburn that is a tree. It's lined with trees. And the way I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the man that it's named for had a pharmacy there in town in Auburn, and he was a businessman there. Toomer was his name.
Toomer's Drugs.
Toomer's
famous
Drugs.
for their lemonade.
Yeah, famous for their lemonade. And after every Auburn win, they would roll the trees with toilet paper.
Yes.
See what Auburn fans could have done in 2020 with the pandemic. They could have saved all the toilet paper, and then we would have had plenty.
If we only knew.
If we only knew. Yeah. That's right.
We said that's going to be legends we tell our grandchildren that.
That's right.
Day, toilet paper was so prevalent.
Yeah, we stood in line for toilet paper. That's right. Yeah. So yeah, if you had toilet paper, you were rich in 2020. Let me tell you.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
But you're a high roller. But no, seriously, what was it like for Auburn fans across the country to kind of see and hear that something had happened to a place that was so beloved to Auburn grads and alumni all over the country?
Gosh, it was heartbreaking. And initially, if you recall, the call, I remember the call into the radio show that, it's a crazy guy. Well, of course, the university immediately went to testing and seeing if it was true. And finding out, it's heartbreaking. Like I mentioned in my grandfather's yearbook, and his trees back then were just saplings. They were brand new trees, and being a forestry school. And we have a fantastic forestry department. And so that, trees are part of our legacy. In fact, before that, they had, for years, had done a fundraiser where they took oaks from the acorns from the live oak trees and planted them and started generating new trees. They sold them as a fundraiser, but they also used them to replace trees around campus. And that's what they ultimately used, placed the trees at Toomer's Corner. But it truly was just a shock to the system that who would hurt a poor, unsuspecting tree, a defenseless tree. But it just so iconic. The university, in my personal opinion, is that it was a major PR push because they just knew because of the rivalry, how damaging it would be if they came out immediately and said that the trees weren't going to survive. So the forestry department, they brought in experts, they brought in, alumni, and they dug up the soil, the charcoal, they did experimental treatments. They did everything they could to save these trees for 6 months to a year, I believe. But in the meantime, that someone in Tuscaloosa, started an effort, Tuscaloosa for tumors, or Tuscaloosa for the trees. And I believe it was a fundraiser, but it was such a goodwill thing that all Alabama fans aren't this way. We are so sorry that your tradition has been damaged in this way. Well, about 3 months later in April, when Tuscaloosa was hit by this horrible tornado.
You're going where I was going to go, and I'm so glad you did that, because what happened was Tuscaloosa was hit with massive tornadoes. And the next day, Coach Malzahn said, guys, we're heading up to Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
And you see these Auburn players and Alabama players that had just that butted heads in 4 months or 6 months prior in the Iron Bowl that were working side by side to help people out in that community.
Well, and also that online movement, the Tuscaloosa for Tumors, the reverse then happened as a result of the tornadoes. and it became Tumors for Tuscaloosa, where there were major fundraisers. They were doing collections of the items, the necessities that were needed in Tuscaloosa, volunteers. So there were these two huge movements for each school to support each other. And because it probably would have been the second Civil War in Alabama if it hadn't transpired the way it did. So both schools, both communities, I think handled it very well. So in the end, as emotional and hard as it was, and they had ceremonies when they ultimately had to take the trees down, they put out different surveys for people to give opinions of how they should be replaced. Do we want to, do bronze statues so that we had something more permanent, and because could they not ever be replaced? But they did replace them with saplings, and we still roll Tumors Corner, but they have signs around the new trees asking them not to be rolled until they can, because literally there is in the city budget, there's a line item for cleaning Tumors Corner after basketball games, and they have to get up with a lift and pick toilet paper out of the trees. They're having to hose it out. It's a big effort. So they've asked for the new trees to not be rolled until they get well established. So
take me through real quick, and I want to be respectful of your time. Take me through, thinking back, take me through one of the biggest obstacles that you faced in your life, and what was the lesson you learned from it? Because I asked people, that you kind of knew where I was going. Yeah. Take me through that, something in your life that was an obstacle that you overcame and the lesson you learned from it.
I had lots to choose from, but one that comes to mind that's kind of haunted me for a long time was a guy I dated. He was down in Nashville, and he was in the music scene and following his passion of music. And he, as we were dating, he always, what are you passionate about? What are you passionate about? Follow your passion, career-wise, and, with your life. And I kept coming back to, people. It's people. People are my passion, and experiencing life and helping people live their best life. But that wasn't a good enough answer for him. And he's like, well, everybody's passionate about people or, living their life. That's, what? You've got to find your passion. You've got to find your passion. And ultimately, the relationship ended because he felt he needed to let me go to find my passion. And for years, that question haunted me of what is my passion? And I kept coming back to people. And it literally was probably about a good 15 years. And really till I had my training career established and seeing the work that we did together at Sullivan and helping students achieve their dreams through their education, and kids that might not otherwise be able to have an education or reach their educational goals, and seeing the difference that one person can have in someone's life, made me realize, that people that's perfectly acceptable. That's a pretty darn good passion. I don't think there's a better one to have. And it took me a long time to let that go. But that was kind of a setback for me for a long time. That question really haunted me.
Wow. Well, I mean, you've overcome well, and you've bounced back well. And so share with the audience your biggest piece of intentional encouragement, because, there might be somebody that's listening and goes, yeah, for the last 15 years, I've been chasing a dream, or for the last 15 years, I've been trying to find what really makes me happy, and I'm not finding it. So I know you've got a big piece of intentional encouragement for folks out there in maybe in that boat.
Wow. I would say twofold. One would be, who is it that you're seeking approval from, or who is it that you're seeking to please? And I think sometimes who is that we're seeking to please, is it your haters or your detractors? And if so, why? Because, it might be to seek their approval, but a lot of times we're not fans of them either. So why do you want to get their approval? And to know who your cheerleaders are, and those people who are in your corner and who do want to see you do well, and have that advisory team that you get that advice from, because we all need those mentors in our life, and it can be different people for different areas in your life. The old adage, don't get financial advice from somebody who's bankrupt or somebody who's broke. Like me, I learned don't get dating advice from people who are perpetually single. I'm going to go to my friends who are in relationships or who are married. So have those advisory boards and know what gives you joy. I heard this recently. Make a list of those things that give you joy. Have them identified, know what they are, and run towards that joy. The quote that we so often use when we work together was "the best is yet to come." And I still follow that every day. To me, it's that ever moving finish line. You'll never get there, but to know that every day can be better and better and better, and running towards that joy, I believe you can get there. The best is yet to come.
Well, I was thinking as you were saying that, you were like, well, it's like me talking about, giving dating advice or something. I was like, in my case, it would be like me teaching a Mensa class. Like I would be rolling in and be like, who is this moron? Like, he can barely, he's barely functional, and yet he's trying to, to tell us something. So, Laura Jones.
Advice on encouragement, go see Brian Sexton.
Well, it's the blind squirrel theory in full effect. You tell me. I mean, it's, but
you're doing a pretty darn good job.
Thank you. Checks in the mail. Checks in the mail.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tell folks how they can connect with you. I know how to connect with her, but I'm not giving you her cell phone number. You'll have to connect with her on these platforms.
Sure. Well, I am on LinkedIn at Laura Jones. I'm sure there are thousands of us out there. I kind of like being a little bit anonymous online. So if Brian is connected with me, you can find me through Brian's connections, I'm sure, on LinkedIn. And I am on Twitter, but I use my Twitter account more as a library of resources for me, my personal use, but you're welcome to follow me on Twitter. I'm not that exciting. That's one of the two best ways to connect.
She so undersells herself. It's like, I'm not that exciting, and look at me. I'm like the epitome of idiocy here. It's like, if you follow me on Twitter, it's very random. Like if I'm whatever. But listen, this has been so much fun. I knew it would be. You're the best. And I appreciate you, and thank you for joining me, Laura A. Jones. I am so indebted to you, and thank you for joining me on the Intentional Encourager podcast. My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And of course, the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. If you're not subscribed to the Intentional Encourager podcast, hit the subscribe button wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss an exciting episode where you can get encouraged and stay encouraged. And remember, anyone, anywhere, at any time, any place can be an intentional encourager.